Thank you very much, Keith, and to Chris, and thank you everybody for joining us today. And I think nobody who's been living in and around the UK for the last little while would have been able to miss the fact that there has been a huge development and in the rate and the scale of construction of offshore wind farm projects in UK waters, and that's also the case as we go wider into Europe, and now in 2020 also starting to expand fast into the Asia Pacific region, and there's also a strong pipeline of projects in the US. So in terms of large-scale constructions offshore, it seems that that offshore wind is likely to be the fastest growing part of the offshore construction business. So today I'm going to talk for a little while about the provision of marine warranty survey services, and specifically to offshore wind farm projects. I'll spend just a very short time introducing Global Maritime, and I know that's not why most people came, so we'll get over that quite quickly. And I also appreciate that there is probably a broad range of knowledge of what marine warranty survey is on the call. There'll be some people, I know there's some people here who are hugely experienced in the topic, and there may be some for whom this is a new concept. So we'll explain a little bit about what marine warranty is and what that means in terms of scope of work. Then I'll talk a little bit about the specific considerations for offshore wind projects, because they are in some ways subtly different from some of the more traditional oil and gas projects for which the original concept of marine warranty was perhaps originally developed. I'll then just touch on a few kind of lessons learned, and maybe examples of ways where you developers or different stakeholders in the construction operation can get the most out of the warranty surveyor. And then, because it is 2020 and this is the year of coronavirus and COVID-19, I'll just spend a minute or two talking about some specific impact of that on the provision of these services, and how potentially that could be mitigated. So as I said, first of all, to Global Maritime. Global Maritime's been around now for in excess of 40 years. And one of the mainstays of the business throughout the whole of that time has been the delivery of marine warranty survey services to a very broad range of projects all over the world. In addition to MWS, we also provide extensive services in dynamic positioning, also in engineering design, engineering analysis, and the provision of marine operations services, where we are effectively the T&I contractor for certain types of operations. So just to give you an idea, we are at present around about 250 permanent staff based in 19 offices in 15 countries spread around the world. We are part of the Norwegian industrial group Moreld, a position that we share with around 20 other companies that provide a range of services to the offshore and construction sector. And as I said, we've been around for over 40 years, established in 1979. So these are our where we do business at the moment, and where we have permanent staff based. You can see ranging from Houston in the US, Canada. The bulk of our operations, and around about 70% of our personnel, are based in and around Europe. You can see that there are 8 offices spread around the North Sea basin there. We have a strong presence in the Middle East with a further 4 locations, and then spread around the Asia Pacific region in Singapore, KL, Jakarta in Indonesia, China in Shanghai, and also in Perth in Western Australia. So that's a very quick overview of GM. So, but we will go on to why we came, which is to talk about marine warranty survey. So marine warranty is basically the third-party approval of large-scale construction and transportation operations. The reason that it comes about is because of the high value of the assets and the inherent risk that exists in any kind of offshore environment, and particularly in the transportation and installation of high value, high weight, and these types of components. So nearly all of these large-scale offshore construction activities, and whether that's in the oil and gas sector or in renewables, it's not just offshore wind, it could be tidal power, it could be wave energy. Most of these projects in a large scale will be insured against losses during the transport and installation phases by the owners of the construction, so the developer of the project, typically. So these insurances are typically from worldwide markets, where the insurance is sought through brokers, who will then place that insurance with underwriters. The specific type of insurance that's used and covers these temporary phases of these construction activities is usually termed construction all risk, or CAR insurance. And this typically covers the marine activities. So from the point at which a component that's to be installed is loaded out from the quayside to the point at which it's made safe in its final installation location. But occasionally this can be extended to cover other parts of the operation, some types of land transport and yard moves and other things like that. And that's the insurance policies. And often included in those insurance policies is something called a marine warranty clause. And that is where the underwriters will typically require that the insurance risk is warranted, i.e. that the risk is assessed and that the operation is approved by a third party. And that will be a marine warranty surveying company. So somebody like Global Maritime, ourselves, or some of the other companies who provide these good quality marine warranty services to the offshore industry. It's most common that these industry insurance policies, the CAR policies that are referred to, will make reference to the Joint Rig Committee. And that is a committee of underwriters and other stakeholders that's been developed to and has established generic scopes of work for marine warranty surveyors, and provides guidance on how these services should be provided to the industry. The JRC, as the Joint Rig Committee is commonly known, provides an extensive suite of documentation covering everything from moving of oil and gas rigs to the specific scopes of work for subsea installations and all types of construction operations. The insurance policy will generally require that the marine warranty surveyor will review and approve things like the design criteria for the operations, all the calculations and engineering analysis that goes into supporting that, determining the things like the weather limits or the general operational limits for the operations. Looking at the documentation that governs the procedures, so it explains step by step how these operations will be conducted offshore, and also that the warranty surveyor will approve the proposed equipment. So typically that will refer to the vessels that are undertaking the work offshore, but also is extended to specific pieces of equipment that may form an essential part of the installation activities. So I've mentioned the Joint Rig Committee as really being the sort of the governing standard by which a lot of the marine warranty surveying work is carried out, and is really the kind of term of reference for the scope of work and so on. But also recently formed in 2017, we have the Society of Offshore Marine Warranty Surveyors, or SOMS, which is a new institution to basically to provide guidance on quality and to actually to certify the individuals in a form who are undertaking this work. And I think we have some personnel here who have been involved in the setup of that organization, and I think that's a great step forward for the warranty surveying industry to have that body now at the heart of it. So just coming back to the scope of work, and I'll read some of this out because it's some of this is from the JRC documentation. So the fundamental objective of the MWS is to make reasonable endeavours to ensure that the risks associated with the warranted operations, so that's the operations that are covered by the car insurance policy, are reduced to an acceptable level in accordance with best industry practice. So specifically from the foreword there in some of the JRC documentation, it says that it's the duty of the assured, and the assured in this case refers to the insurance policy holder. So this would be, in the case of a wind farm, this would be the wind farm developer, typically, that they should procure the compliance with all recommendations, requirements or restrictions of the marine warranty surveyor within the specified timescales. So that basically means that when the warranty surveyor is asked to approve documentation, procedures, vessels, and the actual initiation of the activity itself, that the holder of the insurance policy is responsible for ensuring that any recommendations made by the warranty surveyor are complied with. And it then goes on to say that in the event of a breach of this duty, the underwriters will not be liable for any loss, damage, liability or expense arising from or contributed to by such breach. So put into simple terms, it means that if the requirements of the warranty surveyor are not met, that potentially the operation may not be insured. And I say may not because there are specific considerations to be taken into account in every case. So that means that if we define the warranty surveyor in one sentence, it is a third-party organization that reviews and approves large, or not always large, but offshore construction activities to ensure that there is a valid insurance coverage in place in accordance with the terms of the insurance policy. So typically, we split the marine warranty survey scope of work into several parts. One of the first of these is documentation review. I'll talk a bit about that just now, and then I will mention suitability surveys of vessels and equipment. And the third main part is the attendance and the specific approval of the operations, typically by the issuance of a certificate of approval for the commencement of the operation. But if we start with the documentation review, then what this means is that all the relevant project documents, so that could be design documents for installation equipment, could be operational procedures, that, as I said, these are the ones that define the steps to be undertaken and the methods to be used within the operation. Any supporting analysis that provides input into these procedures, and the engineering calculations. These could be lift rigging calculations. They could be the dynamic analysis of the movement of a cable during installation operations, or as we can see from the kind of bottom left graph there, it could be the jacked up stability of an installation vessel, and the relevant preload requirements, and that the vessel was set up suitably to be able to perform that lift in the relevant weather conditions. So the review of this documentation will be based upon typically industry standard design codes and criteria. And generally the installation contractors or transportation contractors who are undertaking the work will produce their documentation in accordance with that in order to make it easier to verify that it is in accordance with these codes and therefore could be considered best practice. As a result of these reviews, typically there will be a response provided in the form of a document review sheet, sometimes known as a comment sheet. These are then submitted generally back to the insurance policy holder, or whoever is the client of the marine warranty surveyor in that particular case, and passed on to the originator of the document, which is typically the installation contractor, for the comments to be addressed. These comments can take various forms. Most warranty surveyors will use a kind of three-tier system to denote the kind of criticality of each comment, and hopefully will also provide some indication of what would need to be provided to address that comment on their behalf. The document originator, the contractor, then has the opportunity to either revise the documentation or to provide a response back to explain maybe why something has been done a certain way, to provide a clarification on the method of a calculation or something like that. And at the end of the review, before the operations are due to commence, in an ideal world, all the documentation has been fully reviewed, fully approved, and there are no outstanding comments. So the purpose of this review is really for the MWS to take all reasonable steps to ensure that the operational procedures are feasible, that this operation can actually be conducted in the method that it has been described, that they represent best practice, or at least an acceptable practice in terms of the level of risk to the insured asset, and that the documentation provides all the information that's required to demonstrate that the operation has been engineered and planned in an appropriate way, and that the risk to the assured assets, and therefore to the insurers, is minimized to a level that is as low as reasonably practicable. So it also involves ensuring that these supporting calculations for whatever the analysis or engineering may be, that these are technically correct, that they follow a method that can be understood and is applicable and justifiable for the type of operation, and that these support and tie up with the information that's provided in the operational procedures. So often these documents will determine things like weather limits for the operation. That might be a combination of wind loads, vessel motions, and things like that all go together to provide a maximum allowable sea state, wind limit, and things like that, for covering things like lifting operations, perhaps mooring of a vessel while it's alongside a platform or anything like that. And the purpose of this is really twofold. I mean, first of all, it's as I said, to ensure that the documentation is of a sufficient standard. That was a difficult word for some reason. And to be obvious to the warranty surveyor that the operation has been planned effectively, that the engineering is correct, and that there is no reason to believe that there should be any unforeseen circumstances developing in following those procedures. But it also forms an auditable trail via these comment sheets that I talked about, of any concerns that have been raised over the documentation, and importantly, what the final evidence was that the documentation has been approved for use in the specific operation. So I mentioned industry standard guidelines and codes. I mean, it's important to mention that there is typically no specific legislation or legal framework governing these, although wind farms can be slightly different, because sometimes the wind farms fall under things like the CDM regulations and so on, which do provide an additional level of kind of legislative requirement on top of some of these things. But in terms of the approval of the marine activities, typically these are to be conducted in accordance with industry standard documentation, such as that's been issued by DNVGL. There's ISO standards and other such similar things. Although it is important to remember that a lot of these documentations, certainly particularly in the earlier stages of offshore wind development, were documents that had been developed for the types of operations that were happening in the oil and gas industry. And therefore, there are and still are in some cases where they need a little bit of interpretation for the specifics of renewables projects. And that's really where the kind of skill and knowledge of the warranty surveyor comes in, to be able to not just tick boxes against a specific set of expectations and standards in documentation, but to be able to provide that added value in being able to demonstrate and assure basically that the operation is being conducted in accordance with good practice for the type of work that it is. A point on that, because we often get asked this, is given that some of the other warranty surveying companies like DNVGL or the former Noble Denton have their own standards and guidelines, why don't Global Maritime? And we have to date certainly considered that issuing our own standards would add additional burden and complexity to a market that already has quite a solid set of documentation and guidelines set out within it. And therefore, for our perspective and for a number of other companies like ours, then we are willing to adopt at the outset of the project the guidelines that we feel are applicable or determined in combination with the insured and the insurance underwriter. Sticking with legislation, obviously the vessels themselves, they fall under international shipping legislation, but we also will often expect to see that regional safety regulation compliance, so for example, the UK HSE, that it is being achieved by the vessels that are operating in the relevant waters. And for DP vessels, which do make the large majority of vessels involved in these kind of operations, then they will generally have audits, DP trials, FMEA and class approval, and a lot of the trials and so on being conducted in accordance with IMCA guidance or equivalent. So sticking with the vessels, one of the other phases, as I mentioned, is the warranty surveyor is required to inspect and approve the equipment involved in the operations. So in many cases, this refers to the installation vessels or the transportation vessels themselves. So a lot of the time for that, for us in particular, but for other companies use different methods, we have our own in-house inspection software, something called GM Inspect, which allows our surveyors to produce a standard and kind of repeatable report covering the elements that are deemed to be important in determining both that the vessel is capable of undertaking the operation, but also ensuring that it is being operated and managed in a way that is appropriate for the type of work that it's going to be undertaken. So as it says there on the screen, the warranty surveyor inspects the vessels to ascertain that the capabilities are in line with the expectations of the calculations and that the vessel is fit to undertake the procedures. And also as I mentioned earlier, in line with the clause in the car policy, this is an important step in making sure that if there was to be a claim, and obviously the aim of the warranty surveyor is really to ensure that there isn't, but if it was to happen, that the insurance underwriters would deem that the operation had been conducted correctly, and that then they would honour that claim. And in the same way, the warranty surveyor will often inspect specific equipment. So this could be self-propelled modular trailers, for example, being used to move heavy objects onto a barge. Say that could be in Windfarm context, it could be a substation topside, or maybe even large jackets or things like that. Specific tailor-made lifting equipment may also fall under that remit, and other types of cranes and equipment like that, and ensure that this equipment is fully operational and that it's been appropriately certified for the task that it's undertaking. The last part, and in some ways this is one of the key parts of the warranty surveyor's role, is the attendance on site and the issuing of the certificate of approval that I mentioned earlier on. So the certificate of approval is basically the final approval from the warranty surveyor that basically says they feel that the operation is suitable to commence. So this is a binding document that basically says that the warranty surveyor believes that, as we mentioned earlier, the documentation is acceptable, that the vessels and equipment have been considered suitable and are approved for use, but also involves a lot of work on site itself. So that is to assure that the operation has been prepared for, that if it was a lifting operation, that the rigging has been set up correctly, that it's properly certified, and that the weather forecast is suitable and in line with the limits set out in the approved documentation, not just for the duration of the operation, but for that plus the relevant contingency that might be applied to that. So once the surveyor is satisfied that all these necessary checks have been carried out, and as I said earlier, that the documentation is fully approved and the vessels are deemed suitable, then they will issue this document called a certificate of approval, which will reference the operation that's being undertaken. It'll often reference the assets that are being handled, the vessels that are undertaking the work, and often the specific procedure that or documentation that governs that operation. And again, it's about forming an auditable trail to be able to demonstrate that it was considered correct by the suitably qualified warranty surveyor at the time of the commencement of the operation for that work to commence. So that's a sort of high-level overview of marine warranty. So I will think a little bit about wind farm projects themselves and why it is that they're different, but also why it is that they're not different from other offshore operations. So fundamentally, I've written here, the principles of conducting an offshore operation in a safe and efficient manner are really no different in offshore wind as they are in oil and gas or any other transportation or construction operation. Particularly now with the large scale, the value of the assets being handled, the installation vessels themselves, and specifically the risks posed in terms of damage, loss, or injury are actually in general similar across the different sectors. And therefore, the general principles of what constitutes good warranty survey are the same. But there are some specific differences in the nature of the operations themselves that do affect the warranty surveyor in different ways. One of the largest of these, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide or two, is repetitive operations. So if you imagine an offshore wind farm, the foundations often, and specifically the turbines and even the inter-array cables, are often almost identical components that are installed in almost exactly the same way. And therefore, you know, if you think that the installation of some of these larger wind farms now can be something that spans, you know, 2 to 3 summer seasons sometimes of offshore campaigns, then having specific attendance for that for the entire duration is that there may be a limited cost-benefit relationship to that. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Also, specific nature to wind farm projects is there's often a higher likelihood of operating in shallow water and of near-shore operations. And that's particularly true of some of the cable installation work, and particularly the export cables that connect the wind farm to the shore. Wind farm construction sites are busy places sometimes. There are a lot of vessels in activity. There's a lot of operations that are often going on simultaneously, and therefore SIMOPS and the correct management and successful management of multiple vessels operating in relatively close proximity is something that is more likely to occur in a wind farm project than some of the other large construction activities. The other thing that we often see is that there's a wider variety of marine contractors, and that can pose some challenges in itself. I'll come back to those in a minute as well. And often there's quite a range of different approaches in terms of the personnel setup within the developer, which can lead to differences in interface between the warranty surveyor and the wind farm developer, which sometimes can be different to handle in different circumstances. But coming back to repetitive operations. So the normal principle of warranty surveying is that a separate certificate of approval and the witnessing of the operation by the surveyor would be required for every installation or load out or whatever activity. But for a large offshore wind farm, and we're talking now about 100+ turbines, this would result in months and months of attendance by a warranty surveyor on board the vessel, witnessing the same operation over and over again, which comes at a significant cost. And of course, as the operation is repeated more and more times, then potentially the benefit of the attendance of the warranty surveyor is reduced as the operation becomes better known, the learning curves are complete, and so on. So what has been applied in many cases and this is something that's been a lot of discussion back and forward with different underwriters and so on, is something called a certificate of repetition. And this is often issued after a certain proportion of the work has been completed. So sometimes that is a percentage number. Typically it can be 5 to 10% of the installation activities are complete. Then if it's deemed appropriate and it's considered by the attending surveyor and the management of the warranty surveying project that the operation is being conducted in a repeatable manner, then this certificate of repetition can be issued, which is equivalent to or similar to a COA, a certificate of approval, but can cover multiple operations without the specific attendance of a warranty surveyor. But of course, in determining whether it's appropriate to issue that or not, then there needs to be a consideration of things like the sensitivity to the weather, factors that might mean that the operation might not be the same every time, and also things like crew changes, the ability to approve management of change documents on site and things like that. These need to be considered, and they need to be handled quite carefully, because at the end of the day, the important thing here is to ensure that the risk level is not increased to an unreasonable level that might endanger the assets or result in a claim on the insurance policy. In terms of some of the other considerations, I mentioned the near shore work, and as we've seen on several projects, the operation of large cable lay vessels in shallow water for cable landfalls can be a challenging thing, and there have been several different approaches taken to tackling that one, particularly in areas where there's a high tidal range and things like that, to ensure that the vessel would never become stranded, that the cable wasn't in danger, and things like that. Along with that, there can be much more interface with shore infrastructure, things like sewage outfalls and all that kind of thing can come close to these operations in a way that they often wouldn't in some of the more traditional oil and gas projects, or at least it's more common in the wind farm, where everything has its own shore connection, sometimes multiple. And of course, being close to shore, there then is there's the additional chances of pleasure craft and so on that we've seen on several projects have made their presence felt in coming close to vessels, just to see what's going on there, and may not realize that there's an expensive cable hanging over the stern, or that there are anchor lines or something in the vicinity. The other thing, and this is quite common for a lot of the UK wind farm projects, is that there's quite an extensive UXO risk. A lot of the places where wind farms have been installed up until now have been some of the shallow water areas off the east coast of England, and some of them are right in the area where the RAF bombers would dump their unused load after the Second World War into the sea. And so there's an extensive campaign that goes on at the start of every construction to ensure that these unexploded objects, as UXO stands for, are identified and, if necessarily, removed or made safe in some way. But it's an extra consideration that has to be taken into account specifically, or more commonly, for wind farm projects. There is often a wider range of contractors involved in these types of work. Quite a lot of the large oil and gas projects are executed by quite a small number of well-known large contractors. The way in which offshore wind farm construction is often conducted means that the overall construction is often made up of a larger number of smaller scopes. And even these scopes themselves, it's often split into one contractor for the foundations, one for the array cables, one for the turbines, one for the substation, one for the export cable, as a typical split. But even within that, there can be separate small packages for things like cable burial, or some of the nearshore preparatory works, or the horizontal directional drilling that allows the export cable to penetrate the land to the appropriate position. And this can mean that there is a larger, more varied number of contractors involved who, sometimes will have come from a different background, who may not be as familiar with the kind of common or best practice in the offshore industry, have maybe spent more time working in nearshore infrastructure projects or something like that. And this can lead to some challenges in terms of the review of the documentation, and sometimes just the culture and the expectations of that particular contractor. And that can sometimes be a bit of a clash with what the warranty surveyor is trying to achieve. And we hear a lot of phrases like, we've always done it that way, or we never normally need to do that. And these are probably perfectly true statements. I think in many cases they are, but true in the context of not having operated under a regime that requires marine warranty surveyor approval in the way that it does on a project like this. But nonetheless, these operations are handling high value assets. They may be burying cables, they may be working in proximity to an already laid cable or something like that. And therefore, it is necessary to ensure that the operation is planned effectively, and that the risks associated with it are appropriately mitigated. I mentioned that there can be a large marine spread, and this is quite an interesting one, because it also is impacted by the different way in which the wind farm developers contract the operations and also the marine warranty surveyor. Because as I mentioned, there can be multiple installation scopes that are happening at the same time. So typically, inter-array cable installation will be happening concurrently with either the foundation or the wind turbine installation, sometimes both. And particularly when things like the offshore substation or the OTM or whatever it's called in that particular case is being installed, there may already be pre-laid cables on the seabed and things like that. And actually, I think it's one of the areas where the warranty surveyor can add a lot of value. There is providing a useful link across these different packages. We've seen examples in the past where one part of the project had different documentation on the heights of the apertures in the monopiles, and the apertures in the monopiles are the holes into which the cable protection systems and ultimately the cables are pulled during the pulling. So the foundation team thought they were at one height above the scour protection, and the cable team thought they were at another. And of course, that has quite significant impacts, both for the installation operations, but potentially for the design of the cable protection systems and things like that. And obviously, the warranty surveyor, if the warranty surveyor is involved in the different facets of the project and is a common set of eyes across the different installation packages, then they can potentially pick that kind of problem up. Another one that happened a few years ago now and was potentially a bad incident was that the vessel that was installing the offshore substation was to be moored on spread mooring and with anchors, with wires run out across the seabed. But again, they did have the as laid position of the export cable, but they didn't know that the export cable had subsequently been moved to have a different termination put on it, had been laid back in a different place. And it was only through the kind of diligence and close attention of the warranty surveyor that picked that up at the time. And having had the documentation from one package and cross-referencing it against another, that made it possible to ascertain that was potentially going to damage that export cable before the operation happened. So that's, as I said, it's the contracting strategy for the contractors and also for the warranty surveyors is quite varied across different projects. And sometimes there will be separate warranty surveyors for the different scopes, in which case there is still the risk that that may happen. But again, it's something that that a good MWS will be aware of, and will ask those questions about the positions of temporary assets and things like that in the field to try and reduce the risk of any such incidents. So just a couple of thoughts on kind of lessons learned and ways in which a project can get the most out of a warranty surveyor. And you know, one of the really important things is defining the scope at the outset. So that needs to be done with reference to the insurance policy, and also you know, very often it's important to do this in conjunction with the insurers so that all parties understand the elements of the operation that are required to be approved, and that there aren't any last minute surprises, because these surprises have the potential to delay the operations and cost money. And if we're thinking specifically about offshore wind, then you know that it's important for these projects to not exceed their budgets. It's quite a when you look at the sort of financing models for these, and the strike price that they get for the different projects, that there's often not a lot of contingency in the construction budget before the project might run into difficulty. The flow of information is absolutely critical, and that's something that COVID has a bit of an impact on. It's really important to have regular update calls and meetings with the warranty surveyor and both the contractor and the developer to understand changes to schedule. And maybe, you know, we've seen situations before where there's been quite extensive discussions perhaps between the contractor and the developer, and nobody's told the warranty surveyor, who all of a sudden gets asked to approve an operation that they haven't seen the documentation for. And these kind of things have happened in the past, and so keeping that dialogue going is critical to a smooth flow of the operation. And one of the other things is realizing that the warranty surveyor is involved in multiple of similar types of operations all over the world, and there can be a lot of experience and lessons learned from the way things have been done well, way that things may not have been done so well in the past, and you know, for the project to tap into that is really quite an important thing. And there needs to be robust project management on both sides, really, and it needs to be ascertained that both sides have the ability and the structure to handle the peaks in workload, and you know, short notice requests to review additional documentation or to attend site for different operations is really quite common, and the ability to handle that is crucial to the smooth running of the operations. And of course, the experience of the company is key to have experience in similar operations so that they can add that value. And I think it's important for the developers to try and tap into that where they can and get that additional added value out of the warranty surveying company. They may be able to provide additional services or advice on things like the statutory regulations, additional vessel assurance for the project to meet specific HSE requirements or something like that, or even a certain amount of engineering capability. But of course, it's important to avoid any conflict of interest there, and the conflict of interest is basically where the warranty surveyor could somehow be represented on both sides and cease to be an independent part of the operation. But I think one of the biggest ones for me is that in some instances a mindset or a culture that the warranty surveyor is something to be scared of and is seen as a barrier to the smooth running of the operations. But my view, and I know that's shared by a lot of my colleagues in the industry, that actually there's nothing to be scared of from the warranty surveyor. If the operations are being planned and executed to an appropriate standard, then actually the warranty surveyor will approve that, and actually should be seen as an important part of the team in making sure that this happens effectively and properly. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about COVID-19, because it's impossible to have a conversation these days and not mention it at some stage. I think one of the things that's really important to remember is that the inherent risks in offshore operations are not reduced in any way by the presence of this pandemic. In fact, there may even be some instances whereby they are increased. It could be that personnel are unavailable because they may have to isolate or something like that. There may be last minute changes or even reduction in numbers of crew members on board vessels. And there might even be a shift of focus that results from the adherence to new procedures for social distancing and even for accessing vessels and things like that. There's also a higher likelihood that there will be no face-to-face meetings between relevant personnel in advance of the operations, and of course that's something that needs to be managed quite carefully. And of course, as I've mentioned, the marine warranty scope that involves attendance of personnel either on a quayside, at some kind of work site, or on board a vessel by definition. So that is travel at a time when travel is both difficult and coming at a higher risk. And it also puts people potentially in proximity to others on board a vessel who wouldn't otherwise be. So that raises risks of its own. But there are some opportunities to mitigate these COVID risks in some ways, and some of these we've taken on as GM, and I know some of the other companies have been doing the same. But of course, it needs to be carefully controlled so that the risk level isn't increased by the application of these. A couple of these are remote surveys. So for certain types of vessels, we've particularly developed an online tool where the crew of the vessel can provide all the information needed to verify certain aspects of the ship. So that could be the documentation or certification for the vessel or some of its equipment, but also photographs, things like crew training manuals and so on, so that in some cases, and where it's deemed appropriate to do so, that the survey can actually be done remotely by reviewing the information that's provided as a kind of drag and drop system of these files and photographs and things into an online copy of the survey list, if you like. There's also been a couple of instances where it's been appropriate to do remote approval of operations, but that's something that needs to be done in close dialogue with the insurers themselves, and in such a way that any additional risks that are brought about to the assets are mitigated in some way by that. But I think that's something that the longer this pandemic and the difficulty in travel and accessing work sites continues is probably something that's going to be explored more and more. And we're pleased to be a part of that discussion at the moment. Okay, well, that was what I had to say on the subject of warranty surveying for wind farms. So yeah, if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Johnny, for a very thorough presentation on the subject. I think we all appreciated that. Your presentation has generated a number of questions on the chat box, and I thank Jamie for reminding everybody, as I failed to do so at the beginning, to put your questions there. We did have one question before the meeting, and Nina's kindly posted that. It's from Paul Potter, and it's, do marine warranty surveyors have to be accredited by the Society of Offshore Marine Warranty Surveyors in order to sign a certificate of approval? That's the first question from him.
Yeah, in answer to that one, at the moment, it depends on the wording of the insurance policy. There are some that have started to specify that, but a lot at the moment still don't. But you know, we believe that that's the way the industry is heading and should be heading in the long run to ensure that we get the correct level of experience and quality in the personnel who are undertaking this work.
Okay, I think you've answered part of the second one, but it was what is the JRC's policy on this? And the MWS company is likely to only take on SO-MWS accredited marine warranty surveyors during the attendances from now on.
Sorry, the part of the question was what was the JRC's?
Well, what is the JRC's policy on this? I think you covered it. And are MWS companies likely to only take on SMWS accredited marine warranty surveyors during attendances from now on?
I think that will be increasingly the case. But if by take on you mean employ, then not necessarily, because there are methods and ways for training the personnel and gaining the accreditation during the employment with the warranty surveying company. So I think it'll be if we're talking about taking on personnel, it'll be a combination of taking on pre-accredited people and gaining accreditation for those who have the necessary experience.
Okay. And David Clinton asks, do you know what the fee structure for SO-MWS is?
I actually did, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if there's somebody from SOMS here who could answer that for us. Certainly, it's something we can find out.
Yeah. Okay. It's fine. I would assume it's pretty similar to other societies, is it?
Yes, it's not particularly
not horrendous
financial burden on the individual, certainly, and most of the companies will if you're working for a warranty surveying company, then they will typically cover that, I believe.
Okay. A question from Nina, and she asks, does the marine warranty surveyor undergo lots of training, or if the person is already a surveyor, does he qualify to be a marine warranty surveyor?
It depends on what their specific experience is. I mean, yes, there is really there needs to be an extensive training program undertaken, because this is, if you think about the individual who's approving the operations on site has a lot of responsibility, and they are the one that has to say yes or no on whether or not that operation is suitable to commence. And given the value of some of these assets and the risk involved, that's something that shouldn't be undertaken lightly. So there is, there are different ways of doing the training. There are fixed training programs and material that companies like ourselves will put people through. There's also methods of having shadow surveyors on site, and that's something that's a little bit more challenging at the moment in these days of COVID, is to have people gain that experience as a warranty surveyor by following somebody else and observing the procedures and so on. But a lot of the experience, certainly on the marine side for the master mariners and things, comes from having been involved in these type of operations in different ways. The same is true of the engineers, of having potentially undertaken these engineering calculations that then need to be reviewed, or as the marine personnel having been perhaps an offshore construction manager or something like that, and actually been undertaking these operations and working in an offshore environment.
Okay. The next question is from Umat Disman, and he states that MWS is a third-party approval. Is it mandatory to take it for all marine construction works or heavy lifting works? When they request from the contractor as a client to take marine warranty survey, their reply is always, we have a car.
That's a strange response to have got, because often the car policy will specifically state that there should be a warranty surveyor appointed in order for the policy to be valid. So, I mean, not every large offshore operation will have a warranty surveyor. There are some operations where they are self-insured, or I think in a very small occasion there may not be a warranty clause in the policy for some specific reason, but certainly our experience is that the majority of large construction operations have that, and therefore there is a warranty surveyor appointed.
Okay, thanks. Here's the tricky question from Chris coming up. He says the MWS reviews the load out, transportation and installation, but should the MWS get involved before this? For example, when a company selects the cable and take part in acceptance testing to make sure it's fit for purpose?
Yeah, and sometimes that is something that does get included in the scope, and but I think in some cases it can be quite important. There have been instances in the past where cable or other assets have resulted in damage as a result of maybe manufacturing defects or problems with the manufacturer's data for that, which wouldn't typically fall under the warranty surveyor scope. So I think there is a case for that, because it can result in some additional risk. Although often there are other third-party approval bodies that can be that can be engaged at those sorts of stages.
Okay. The next question is from JP. He says, do you believe that the competition around surveyor day rates has reached a point where MWS quality is being reduced in favour of cheaper rates, and thus causing an increase in incidents and insurance claims?
Yeah, it's certainly a concern, and I think it's shared by a number of my colleagues from many different companies as well. That I think that in the last few years there has been obviously there's been a large focus on cost reductions in the offshore industry, as you can imagine, from the oil and gas downturn starting in kind of 2015, and obviously it's been maybe accentuated this year by what's happened in the global markets around about the coronavirus pandemic. And so reducing costs has become very important. And therefore the warranty surveying industry has been very, very competitive for quite a number of years now. And I think that's one of the real challenges that all of us as warranty surveyors have is ensuring that, you know, the cost of the day rates is one thing, but actually the value and risk associated with the operations doesn't change, and therefore the quality of the service provided really shouldn't. But in answer to JP's question, I am concerned that in some cases it is being affected by commercial considerations that to do with the low rates and so on. But I mean, we are certainly trying very, very hard to prevent that from happening.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Well, we have a number of, I don't think they're really questions, more like statements coming up. So I'll just go through them quickly, and if you disagree, then obviously jump in. But from Gary Hogg, he says the norm in the renewable energy market is for the operator to procure MWS rather than the contractor.
Yes.
So that's the norm. Okay.
That is very much the case. Yeah, it's okay. Almost always the developer. Yeah.
Okay, and there's one from Francois, which I think you actually covered later in your presentation, but he says, would it be possible to perform or provide remotely COAs in regards of COVID issues, which I think you covered at the end of your presentation, right?
Yes, so just, yeah, I guess to reiterate that, yeah, absolutely, it's possible, but it needs to be done in a very controlled way, because it has the potential to introduce additional risk into the operation that wasn't there before. So it's you know, it's a case-by-case basis at the moment for that one.
Okay. And Paul Sullivan asks, is there an industry norm on the items which should be subject to MWS involvement? And he's really looking, is there a financial value threshold?
The industry norm thing is covered by the JRC documentation. So the scope of work there states the type of operations and because of that, the specific assets in many cases that should be covered. I mean, most insurance policies will have a kind of deductible limit, like an excess almost, if you like. And you know, sometimes for wind farm projects, because there are a large number of smaller components, they might actually fall under that deductible threshold. But nonetheless, typically they are still warranted and COAs provided as they were. But it varies from policy to policy in my experience.
Okay. Then there's some questions which people have been answering online. I think there's a lot of your colleagues online that are trying to help you out by answering as we've been going through the presentation. Johan asks, is there a standard MWS scope for wind power similar to the JRC for oil and gas? And John Munnings has responded, JRC will issue specific scopes of work for offshore wind probably by the end of 2020, and they have been drafted this year. And he also, okay, that's it. So presumably you agree with that, that those are...
That's right. That's right. I remember seeing some early versions of those a while back, but I understand they're in the pipeline, which will be great. Okay, great. David Clinton was a bit surprised that the certificate of repetition is only at 5 to 10%. He says that seems a little bit low. As I said, it varies significantly from project to project, and it depends on the number of the total number of assets. Because if say it was a small pilot floating wind farm with only 10 turbines, then 5% would be, well, it would be, well, even 10% would be one, which really wouldn't be sufficient to demonstrate that the operation was repeatable. But if we're talking about 100 plus, then 10% could be 10 or more of the same operation, by which time in many cases there's sufficient evidence to demonstrate that this is a repeatable operation that can be conducted safely each time. But as I said, it's usually the 5 to 10% is something that is kind of determined in combination with the insurer's representative at the start of the project, and obviously can be varied at any time depending on the progress of the operations. Okay. Jonathan Morley was a little bit concerned about the unexploded objects, finding them since they would not be documented. There's a host of responses to that saying what happens if the UXO risk is high, then a UXO survey is required before the construction work, and a UXO clearance certificate is required. That was responded by Shaming Lee. Yeah. So and Gary Hogg says a geophysical survey combined with electromagnetic and magnetic detectors. That was from Gary Hogg. David Edwards. UXOs can be detected using magnometer and other seabed surveys. So there's a whole host of questions about, obviously you have to do a UXO survey, I think is the answer that came from your colleagues, I think. Oh, that's absolutely right. So there'll be a UXO survey by a number of different means. Sometimes it's the magnetometer and also kind of visual inspections, and normally there will be an accredited body that will issue an alert certificate for areas to say that they believe the risk of any unexploded ordnance in that area or in the proximity that could interfere with the operations is as low as reasonably practicable. And that's one of the things that as warranty we are looking for being in place in all the parts of the wind farm where the operations could be going on. Okay, a question from Robert Chaplin. And he says, with so many contractors involved in offshore wind farms, is there a risk of deep water horizon style litigation with different contractors trying to deflect blame for any accident? I think there certainly is, and in some cases we've seen quite complicated contractor structures with subcontractors of subcontractors and things like that, and reliance on each other. So, I mean, hopefully not a deep water horizon in terms of the horrendous explosion and environmental damage and so on, but there's certainly the potential there for extensive litigation to go on, and actually there has been some that we're aware of in some cases over things that have gone wrong. Okay. A question from Erdem Zezgin, who says, is MWS something that can be applied to salvage and wreck removal works? Yes, that has been done, and actually I believe that the Costa Concordia wreck had a warranty surveyor appointed to it, and in fact we ourselves were sort of effectively the warranty surveyor for the removal of a stranded excavator at one stage as well. So it's yes, it certainly could, and it would depend on probably the value of the asset. And if it was an insurance requirement, then there would have to be some residual value to the asset. But we've also seen situations where warranty surveyors or similar companies have been appointed just as kind of third-party approval consultants for these kind of operations as well, but not specifically MWS.
Okay. Question from Cohn Peters, who says, is it not true that the potential damage in financial terms is somewhat lower than with a typical oil and gas project because of the project is much more divided between the more numerous items to be insured? And does this impact the scope of the MWS?
That can sometimes be the case. You know, as I mentioned, the value of an individual, say, turbine blade in comparison with, you know, with some of the oil and gas assets, like for example, if you were towing an FPSO, it's just a completely different order of magnitude. But there are some elements that are large, high value assets, such as the substation platforms as well, which can be the top sides alone, 2,500 to 3,000 tons, sometimes more, extremely expensive. But the other thing that I guess is between both oil and gas and offshore wind is that there's a real risk of cost due to project delays, and particularly for offshore wind, as there can be large penalties if you don't meet a deadline for first power. So if you have, say, your export cable that's on the critical path, and something happens to that, then that could be catastrophic for the project. But in terms of kind of impact on the warranty scope of work, not really. There can be some elements, but generally it's the same principles applied to everything that's warranted, in that the aim is to do it in a safe and effective manner to avoid an incident.
Okay, thanks. There's a few chats going on about SOMS and the annual fee, etc. People have been researching while we've been speaking. Initiation fee is £50 and the annual fee is around £115. So
sounds about right.
That's not too bad. And somebody's posted the website. I saw somewhere, soms.org. Go there for more info. That's from Doug DeVoy. So thanks, Doug. That's good. Very interactive, this session. A question from Michael. Can you see issues if the main contractors had to take responsibility for bringing in and working directly with the MWS on a project and from fulfilling the developer's car policy requirements?
Was that, sorry, that was if the contractor had taken...
If the contractor had to take responsibility for bringing in and working directly with the MWS on a project and fulfilling the developer's car policy requirements?
I mean, yeah, there can be an issue there where, of course, the entity or the organization that's paying the bill of the warranty surveyor is the one whom the warranty surveyor is approving the work of, if you like. So, but the key there, I mean, it's in the end of the day, the point of the warranty surveyor is to validate the insurance policy, and you know, I'd hope in most circumstances that the warranty surveyor could avoid being influenced by commercial pressure there. But certainly, it does create a slightly different working environment, and it is a structure that, although I've talked a lot about working for the developer and the contractor being separate, it is a model that happens in quite a number of cases.
Okay. A question from one of our younger members. He's a naval architect graduate and he's aspiring to become an offshore MWS. He's asking if you would recommend taking the MWS course offered by Lloyd's Maritime Academy.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be a great introduction to that, and would certainly be a good stepping stone on the way to gaining the necessary experience and so on, and to get things like SOMS accreditation and be able to work as a warranty surveyor. So absolutely.
Okay. Which I think Chris has just put something up there as well. How do you encourage young persons into the industry and focus on MWS? And obviously, we just mentioned that course. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I mean, it's although we are thinking and agreeing that the industry will go, that the individuals who sign off on the COAs will be accredited SOMS personnel. That doesn't mean that everybody involved in the project has to be. So there's an important kind of responsibility on all of us to train up new warranty surveyors, and therefore to include younger people into the projects, involve them in activities like documentation review under appropriate supervision, or perhaps do shadow work on the same projects as kind of training exercises and so on. So there's it's certainly possible to get involved in marine warranty surveying projects at an early stage in a career by that means. Okay.
We have one or two little bits and pieces, but I'm very much aware that we're coming to the end of our time. Okay, let's let me have a look. There's one from Tuelsker who says, what is your opinion of the definition breach of warranty?
Breach of warranty, I guess it can mean a few things, but typically it would be undertaking an operation without a valid COA, or in contravention to the stipulation made by the warranty surveyor for something that should happen during that operation. That would be I guess the general definition.